I'm Catherine Kingsley.
And I'm Catherine Sterling.
And this is
Contemplating Culture,
a missionary walk through a secular age. Together we journey through A Secular Age by Charles Taylor, a book looking at the history and philosophy of how the world got where it is, and the impacts of our contemporary culture for us today as missionaries.
And we're inviting you to join the conversation.
Hello and welcome to Contemplating Culture.
Hello, everyone.
So in today's episode, we're still within the chapter of the expanding universe of unbelief. And we're looking today at how not only is the realm of possible positions of unbelief and everything in between getting bigger, but that some new factors start to emerge which make these positions more solid, that there's a new sense of maturity of these positions.
So we're talking, I think we've moved largely from 18th century, which is where we've been in the Romantic period, and we're actually moving into the 19th century. So we're getting closer and closer to our own time. And I think you'll recognise that in the trends that emerge start to feel more and more familiar.
Yeah. So there's two kind of factors that Taylor wants to talk about as emerging in the 19th century that start to bring a new sense of, as I was saying, maturity to the existing stances of unbelief. So unbelief was taking off in the 18th century, but these new factors emerge. And the first of these is what he calls science and scholarship. So effectively, the developments of science start to, and we've looked at it before, science starts to take over all the different elements of human life. This sense of taking out all of the emotion and coming straight back into the rational and what can be measured, and kind of like an impersonal look at everything. And this takes off so much so that it starts to become an ethic. Like there's almost like a moral judgment or some kind of judgment happening on embracing this scientific stance, that it's come through in so many different levels of society, but now it's coming through in a really universal sense, this sense of there's general laws and there's an impersonal order. And this is over and against, I guess, the personal historical nature of Christianity, which is with a person at a time and place that almost can't, that sense of mystery, all of that is seen to be almost something of the past. And the way to engage is now through the scientific lens.
In fact, Taylor says on page 363, he sums it up really well, I think, when he says, from this standpoint, a faith in a personal God belongs to a less mature standpoint, where one still needs the sense of a personal relation to things. One is not yet ready to face the ultimate truth. It just feels like you're being talked down to, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the things I think we'll pick up today is that sense of judgment that comes with this new matured stance, because it's taking over. And I think, like we're saying, it's one of the things that we see is still in place, the scientific stance, that even if you're talking from an emotional standpoint, you still need to have the appearance of the impersonal order when you're coming forward, because that's a value that has emerged from this time.
And it's entrenched in us at school. You know, okay, step back now. Can you just talk reasonably and logically about what's going on for you here? Don't get too emotional about things.
It's very much how we're brought up in a lot of ways of get over your emotions and be able to enter the scientific impersonal stance where you're not affected. And that's very much part of the buffered self, isn't it? That you can be unaffected even by yourself and what's going on in you, and just be able to objectively move forward, see things from that stance from nowhere kind of perspective.
And it even, I think, affects our faith and the way that, like, especially in schools or that sort of thing, that we talk about it and think about it, except in obvious places where we come across it sometimes. But I feel like there is a general way that society views faith, even that's an impersonal thing, that to the extent that it accepts it, it's not really believing in a God who personally intervenes or is personally engaged with me or the world. I spend my life teaching people to pray and expect God to talk back. Miracles, God reaching in, acting in our world. These things, science and the scientific worldview has a huge part, I think, in even shaping within the church our lack of expectation that this is normal.
Yeah. I mean, my Catholic education classes going through school were very much treating religion as a social science. It's just like studying a historical society. These are the customs of that society, like very much a step back, not where do you fit in all of this or who is behind all of this, but very much as a social science, I think is how a lot of Catholic education in schools happens today, is just the outlining of the law and all of that kind of stuff, but very lacking on the engagement with it. This is a personal thing. There's a person involved here. Any of that.
And to the extent that there's any of that, it happens in a primary school. And I think your primary school Catholic education tends to be a bit more personalist. And I feel like it adds to or reinforces that sense that as I grow up, I throw away that primary school expectation that God might answer my prayers, or that God intervenes in the world, or is interested in whether I'm good or not, and that sort of thing. It's like the way that we teach faith in schools, to a large extent, reinforces this idea that faith is a childish thing and you grow out of it into a logical, impersonal, rational space where you don't want to be too enthusiastic or superstitious.
Yeah, like even in years 11 and 12, I did the subject studies of religion, and that's taking it a step further, where you're not just looking at the Catholic faith, but you then are looking at all faiths with that objective stance. So there's probably not unbelief there, but you're looking at all the different faiths, and like we've been talking about, just the marketplace mentality of like, well, here's what's on offer, and let's look at each one objectively as though they're all equal.
Mm.
Because that's the scientific stance, is very egalitarian in that kind of sense. And so that scientific stance, that's the first factor that emerges in the 19th century. The second one, and we've been talking about the development of this, but this shift in the cosmic imaginary. So the shift from the personal, ordered cosmos to the vast, vast universe. And this kind of starts to reinforce then what's happening in the rest of the shifts, that actually, yeah, it's really easy to lose a sense of the personal God when you start to see the world as part of a universe that's very vast and has this sense of flatness about it.
That sense of aloneness in the face of it all.
And in this, it's like, he says, materialism starts to be aligned with adulthood. That this sense of, I'm ready now to face the aloneness, and the things that I have is only the things I can see and touch to help me in that aloneness. And he says science is seen as the stance of maturity, of courage, of manliness, over and against childish fears and sentimentality. So it's very similar to what you were saying before, this sense that there's maturity in taking this stance, and it starts to take hold even and almost especially in people of faith. So one of the ways that this can go, this movement of science, is that it can take you into unbelief, and it makes some quite firm positions of unbelief. But it also starts to undermine certain people of belief. So Taylor talks about how for some people, if their faith was in fact built on less mature standpoints, if, for example, they're a fundamentalist who their religion and sense of faith is based on the accuracy of everything in the Bible, that as science starts to unravel some of that, their whole faith gets dismantled. So any way that they're putting their belief in some less necessary thing, that's easily dismantled by science. It actually starts to really destabilize a lot of Christian positions. If you have quite a childish image of God, if you don't have a personal relationship with God, all of these things, you haven't even followed the logical consequences of the scientific response. You just kind of have this felt knowing that it's better. And so it becomes easier for your faith to be dismantled in this movement.
And I think this is the story that Charles Taylor is essentially writing this book to counter. This is the dominant story that the world of the media, the world of academia wants us to buy in the West. That science comes along and it offers a more convincing story, and we don't need to childishly hold on to faith anymore. And we've moved into a secular age where eventually religion and faith will disappear, and we'll all be strong and courageous and adult and face the reality that we're here and we determine the direction of the world and ourselves.
And we've talked, I think, before around a lot of what these stances can look like. So you can start to embrace exclusive humanism and the modern moral order. But actually, in this time, there's a new, I guess, movement of unbelief that starts to open up. And that would be around the realm of Nietzsche, which is something like a rebellion against exclusive humanism. It says that, hang on, why should I suppress my emotions? Hang on, why should I suppress my desire to be great? Like, the modern moral order is very egalitarian in that sense, whereas this new movement, kind of like the will to power, of just like, why shouldn't I exert my full humanity? And if that includes violence, why not? If it includes, breaking of what you would consider a boundary, why not? Because, and so there's this whole new sense, and that would follow very much of like, well, actually, I'm not even afraid of death because I want to live the fullness of my life, and I don't want to be afraid of death to be able to do that.
And it's quite fascinating, actually, because this movement, if you like, challenges that stance of maturity in exclusive humanism and says, well, you're not really being fully adult in your facing of the universe because you are conveniently ignoring the existence of suffering and violence and death in the world. And in kind of putting it out there that really the important thing is to preserve life and for everyone to be good and nice, you take out the heroic dimension of life. You kind of remove freedom and honor and excellence and the exceptional from our human way of existing. You want us all to be comfortable middle class and not hurt each other. But like, to achieve our full potential as human beings, what if the truth is that we have to trample on one another? And that essentially the way that we're made up imitates the nature that we see around us, where animals eat each other. And you do have a kind of a chain of like a hierarchy of being where animals eat each other, things kill each other, and you achieve greatness by other people's death and suffering. And maybe actual maturity is facing that and not hiding from that.
Yeah. And like one of the areas where the scientific stance starts to take over is in the economy. And I would say you follow this down enough, I think there'd be a lot of people on Wall Street that would be living with this mentality of, well, why shouldn't I? I don't care about the people that I'm crushing to be building my empire because I'm like, I have a right to be making the most of my life and using whatever means I have possible. And if you're dumb enough to invest in that thing or whatever it is, then I'm going to take advantage of that.
Yeah, or if I can get away with using slave labor in this country in order to produce cheap products and make my fortune, well, so be it.
Yeah. And so what happens here is as the stances start to expand, we've no longer just got, nice belief and the nice exclusive humanism, and then the not so nice, the very unpolite will to power. But Taylor says we're getting more and more stances. We're not just talking about two positions on either side of a trench with no man's land in the middle, but actually, yeah, it's not so ordered and structured as that there's a lot more space, a lot more positions. And all the positions other than orthodox belief start to get some solidity around them that they can start to take legs and grow in their own directions without needing to ever turn back in reference to belief?
You can largely walk around and pick and choose. There's people out wandering the marketplace, doing the hard sell for their stall. So you don't even need to go to them. They'll come find you. But there's a very real potential starts to happen in the 19th century of I can choose where I stand.
And I guess the area that interests us as missionaries is what does this mean for us as missionaries? And I think over that period, since this started to emerge in the 19th century, I think we've seen a number of different approaches. Like one might be kind of the fire and brimstone kind of preaching of trying to bring people back into awareness of their ultimate end, trying to bring back something of the transcendent, that there's more than just what you're seeing and doing right now. There's more to that. But the tone, I guess, I mean, I've never received this kind of preaching, but I think the tone didn't always hit the mark. And then there's another approach where you could say, well, the world is besotted with the ethic of this scientific stance, so I must go within the scientific stance and I must start proving Christianity from the scientific point of view. And it's not to say that any of these are wrong. Like, people are just exploring of like, what do we do? Do we go down the road of, you know, like really fiery preaching, or do we go down the road of, you know, really intellectual articulation of why this is true and the probabilities of how much this has to be the most logical, like if you're following logic, this has to be the most logical scenario. So there's lots of different things, but I guess we might even take a minute before we get into that of just looking at what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that mature unbelief.
It doesn't feel good in my experience. I don't know about you, but even like thinking about it growing up within a Catholic school system, there was this very real sense along the way of feeling more and more put on the defensive around why I believed and practiced what I did. And particularly once I'd outgrown the Catholic school system and was out there in the university world, this sense of not just being on the defensive, but being seen, looked down upon, being seen as somehow less than, being seen, feeling like I had to kind of prove myself because there was something inferior, lesser, childish about the way I clung to faith.
Yeah, and I guess that is something that would be the first point. Like, the first point is always going to be able to name what's going off in you. That wherever you sit on this spectrum, and we looked at this really early on, of the naive assumptions, of what naive assumptions do you have about positions of unbelief, and how have you experienced some of those naive assumptions of your belief, and how does that feel? Because if we don't bring it to the surface, we'll often respond out of that unconscious thing that's going on underneath. So it might even be worthwhile just to spend some time kind of acknowledging what that experience is, what some of those thoughts are that go off in you. And then I guess, like, once you've done that, well, if you are wanting to look at how to be a Christian in response to this increasing landscape of really solid positions of unbelief, like, what are some things that we can be taking into that space? So we've got all these really fixed stalls. They're probably not little pop-up stalls. There's some that are cemented in, and I mean, there's ever-growing pop-up stalls. No one wants to be fixed, but there's a lot of people walking around the marketplace and a lot of people that are stuck in one part of the marketplace. So what can we offer into this space?
Well, I think the most powerful thing is, first of all, just what you spoke about, that sense of recognition of, I feel like I've been pushed into a space of defensiveness. I feel like the assumption is that I've chosen the childish, immature option. I feel less than somehow, like I've got to defend my faith. But you're the superior and sophisticated one in the picture here, and I feel tongue-tied.
Yeah.
So to just be able to name that that's what's going on, I feel like often takes me a little bit more out of that space. Like, oh, all right, I'm just living in a world where you're going to push me into that space. I feel like the second thing that I've learned along the way is that it's not an invitation to argue. Like, I think the natural thing in us when we get put into that space is to want to pull ourselves out of it. So we want to come back with a really smart sounding comeback and put the other person in their place.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think when we talk about people's stalls being cemented, when we're talking about this kind of dynamic, we're not talking about, an experience where someone's going to listen to your arguments and suddenly go, oh my goodness, you are so right. I'm going to change my beliefs. Actually, all you're looking at is probably a very awkward conversation in which you either feel more stupid or you feel really frustrated because you've pointed out all the holes in their logic and they're not willing to concede that they're holes. It doesn't actually make for good evangelization on any level, and it doesn't make for good relationships.
And we were talking about this as we were preparing the episode around how, like, if you can see the logical outcome of someone's stance towards life, their life approach, whatever you want to call it, and you can see all the holes, exactly what you're saying, it's not necessarily a helpful approach to say, here's the logical conclusion. Like, why aren't you, conquering the world with your will for power? If this is what you believe at this point, if you followed it through fully logically, that's where you could end up. People don't tend to take too kindly to that. But I guess one of the tools that we would always want to encourage, I guess, would be helping people to be curious and doing that through asking of questions. Like Jesus was a very big question asker, and he didn't force people to agree with him. He just would pose the question and let people kind of sift through what that means. And it is frustrating when you're then watching someone not pick up the logical consequences of if you answer this question properly, you'd get to this point and then you'd realize this, like, it's just not going to happen. And I guess that's why Pope Francis in particular was so big on accompaniment, because a lot of this takes a long time.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've learnt from Charles Taylor, and it's a concept, again, comes from many episodes back right at the beginning of the book, when he talks about mutual fragilization and this whole, that this is what part of the reality of living in a secular age means, is that the existence of both your unbelief and my belief means that neither of us lives in a world where there's zero doubt, where both of us put before the other the option, the very real possibility of there being something else, a different way to believe. And I think one of the things that really struck me when we were discussing that was that in that space, we all have moments of doubt or disengagement, I think he called it. And that's the moment to share or ask the questions. So I wouldn't say don't learn the answers to science and how science works with faith. I wouldn't say don't share your faith, your testimony, your story. But I would say pick your moment. When someone's in full flight, feeling superior and strong in where they stand, it's not the moment.
Yeah.
When someone is in a much more curious space, when someone is much more in a seeking space, then's the moment to have a conversation, because then it can be a real conversation, not a fight. And a real conversation opens up possibilities of opening doors, not slamming them shut.
Yeah.
And in a similar vein, I would say that, like Charles Taylor's been talking in the last couple of chapters, which we podcasted on, about places of no man's land, and that really the people that you can engage with on the subject of faith that you can engage with around this stuff, other people who are wandering in no man's land. So Charles Taylor opens up some of those spaces and what they might look like. But really, someone who's in their cemented in, entrenched stall is not interested or open to what you might have to say, except to smash it down.
Yeah.
But someone who's wandering in no man's land, one of the features of this no man's land is that they're open to everything. So don't be surprised if they're also open to the person who's selling something else as well. But they are curious, they are open, and there's the possibility to share. There's the possibility to ask the questions.
All right. Well, I think that's probably a good place to land for today. Yeah, I'm getting excited because, like, while a lot of this is kind of builds on itself and it kind of becomes revision in a way, we're going to hit a point where we open up some really exciting things because we're getting closer and closer to the 20th century, and some very exciting things are going to happen there in terms of belief and unbelief and the secular age. So every episode is another step towards our current time, and that's, I guess, where I live. So that's my major interest.
Well, you know what scares me about that, though, is the more and more ministry I do amongst young adults, the more I realise that they're actually children of the 21st century. And I'm not entirely sure that Charles Taylor goes fully into that. I feel like we've been picking that up with some of our comments about AI and the World Wide Web and Marvel and some of those things. I'd love it if he could write, if you ever listen to this, Charles Taylor, I'd love it if you could write an extension of your book which discusses some of the unique contributions of the 21st century to this.
Well, when we started this, Kat said, what are we going to do when we get through all the pages? Maybe that's what we'll be doing, Kat. The next the next one will be writing the 21st century applications.
Let's watch this space.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, just if you're listening, continue to engage with it. Hopefully it's helpful for you. And yeah, until next time, be well.
See you later.
This has been Contemplating Culture, a podcast produced by the Missionaries of God's Love Sisters. For more information from today's episode, be sure to check out the show notes. We pray that today has blessed you, and most importantly, we invite you to continue the conversation.